Welcome. We'd like to begin the September 10th, 2018 Plan Commission meeting. It looks like we're all in attendance tonight. And the first item on the agenda would be the approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
Motion to approve. Second.
There's a motion by Bartlett and a second by Jensen. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Next item is a council representative report. Anything to report out?
The council went with the recommendation and approved the next territorial jurisdiction that we had the last planning commission. Other than that, nothing. So.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything or no? All right. Next item would be the staff report.
Staff report in your packet is similar to what you see each month, but there's one item I think it's worth highlighting. We are receiving word that the Hilton True project is likely going to start. They want to break ground by November 1st. Now, they haven't taken out the permit for it yet, but we're hearing they're ramping up for that start date. So hopefully that will materialize in the very near future.
Okay. Item number 5 is a request by Eric Nelson of Great American Home Improvements for approval of exterior renovations, including a new rear treated landing, new windows, tuck pointing, and front facade color change at 155 West Main Street. Eric's in the audience here. You can come up to the microphone, and who wants to begin?
Maybe if you can just give us an overview, Eric. Obviously, they've got all the material, but certainly.
Sure. I think if we start in the front there, essentially, back when they had the fire on the Kegonsa Plaza, there was some damage done on the left corbel. If you can look at that picture there, there's kind of where the two buildings come together. Right there is a missing corbel, and if you look at the other side, so we want to rebuild that side and repair the damaged cornice work and gable. Working our way down, there's a couple of areas that need to be tuck pointed there, but essentially it's towards the top on each side where there's some loose bricks. I mean, they're really loose, so we need to get on that right away and get that tuck pointed, match existing mortar, so you know nothing's sticking out. And then as far as windows are concerned, there's currently a vinyl replacement window in there. It was of poor quality. So, and there's some really big windows on the side. So we're going to essentially put the same type of window in, but a much better quality window that we've used in a commercial setting before. That's going to hold up. As far as colors, there should be in your packet a diagram regarding, let's see here, the colors for the different items on the front. There you go, right there. So we're going with, I'm not the person that picks the colors out, there's a designer for that, but she kind of went with the traditional darker colors. There's some blacks and dark grays, and I think if you go one more page, there's another, there we go. Again, there's a lighter color for accent. So in keeping with the colors there now, they're darker colors, nothing bright. No crazy orange or green or anything like that. Regarding the front door and entranceway, there's one piece of glass that was a single pane heavy glass that's actually has a crack in it now. We're going to replace that one, but we want to keep that storefront look. So that's all we're going to be doing on that. Just replace the glass that's damaged, and the rest of the glass in that front, there you go. Area will remain the same. Now I know they're going to want some sort of signage, but they at the time could not figure out exactly what they wanted to do for signage. There's going to be retail on the first floor and then 2 apartments up. So that's something that they will have to revisit when the time came. I gave them the sign ordinance, but no decisions were made as of this date. So I think that's something we'd have to bring here before planning commission, yeah, and it'd have to work within the confines of the district there. Moving back towards the rear of the building, if you wanna, let's see what we have there next. Oh, that's just another front picture. There again, like the window air conditioners, we're gonna be taking those out. We're putting 3 new complete furnace air conditioning units in the 2 in the apartments and 1 in the commercial area. So we won't have those hanging out anymore, dripping on the sidewalk. Yeah, that's a good detail or picture there of the corbel that we're gonna rebuild. That was damaged during the fire.
Yeah.
And we're gonna match that corbel right there. Moving around to the back, there's 2 apartments upstairs. This is the rear apartment. We're currently in there doing some renovations now, kitchen, bathroom, fixing some of the drywall, resanding the floors, just paint, pretty much cosmetic stuff. Out the back, there's a nice porch, but if you go up a little higher, Rodney, you'll see that stairway right there is not only is it to code, it's not too safe. So our idea is to come out to a landing, extend the landing all the way to the left side corner, and then we could tuck an air conditioning unit under there and put lattice so you don't see it at all from, anywhere. It's hidden. And then the stairway would come on the right side. I think there is a diagram of how we have our stairway.
Sorry, here.
Yeah, there we go. So you've got your landing. The AC unit's gonna be tucked underneath that with some lattice, so that's kind of out of sight. And then there is a railing in the front, which is fine, that's to code, but there's a little half wall on each side that returns back to the house, and we need to add some railing on top of that that'd be consistent with the 2x2 railing that's there, just to get us into the code purpose there. What do we need, 38 inches, Rodney, and
I believe so.
yeah, yep, so we gotta add a little bit to that. The front one, like I say, is fine.
Elevation view.
Yeah, there's a little elevation. And then, of course, in the back there, we're replacing those windows. It'll be all new white windows there, too. Yep, that's a little half fall right there where we're gonna have to add railing on it. And if you go to the previous picture, that's the current railing that's there, so we'll just match that 2x2 look all the way around. That's the air conditioning unit that's just kind of sitting out on the roof there. That's what we want to tuck behind that, underneath that deck, so you don't see it from the ground, or, if you're sitting on that patio, it's not running right there in front of you. That is a pipe that comes off the Kegonsa Plaza building, and it basically, all that water from the roof dumps right onto my customer's property there. So we might have to address that. Maybe they can move it 30 degrees so it's not coming all on their, have a dump on their own property. I just put a picture of that. That's something that they're asking me about, and I bring it to the inspection department, I guess, to help us get that moved a little bit. There is a window going in the midst of those vines. Right in the middle, there's a broken 4x3 window that we're going to be replacing too. Yeah, it's all growing over there. Not a lot of maintenance on the back there for a long time, so.
Got good water supply there.
Yeah, it must.
So above those, can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Above those vines, is that the deck that?
That is correct, yeah, yep.
Landing?
That's the deck right there.
Okay.
With the railing.
Okay.
And Actually, it's a rubber membrane now, and we're gonna be putting down a torch down modified roof, which is a much heavier material, which would facilitate people having chairs out there and be able to use it as a porch. That rubber membrane isn't designed for it, even though people do it. You know, it punctures quite easily. So
Right.
we're gonna beef that up a little bit.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll just first say, I think you're doing a great job at really looking at the details that need to be addressed. Question on this picture here, since we're on it, with all these vines, have you thought about just taking all the vines off?
Yeah, we'd like to take all the vines off.
Okay, so
Yeah,
all the
and
vines are
clean
coming-
that up, and then we want to paint that. Yeah, they're using the same colors in the front and on the back there.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I'd recommend that,
Yeah.
because they're rooting in the building, which is not,
Oh, yeah, they
So-
are.
all right.
Yeah.
And then, if I'm understanding correctly, the windows are all gonna be white according
That's
to the
correct.
design?
Yep.
Okay, is that open to discussion?
Well, I guess that's what's there now, and that's what the owners want. They have white painted trim on the inside on some of the units, so that kind of matches, and the downstairs is gonna be the same thing, so that's kind of matches for what they want on the inside too, as far as white woodwork.
I know a lot of these, you can actually have a separate color on the outside versus the inside. They actually allow you to have two different colors. And that's one of the things that, to me, stood out as not really, not only currently, those white windows just stand out as being replacement windows, because I think in large part, the shiny white color versus the rest of the scheme. And I have no problem with the gauntlet gray and the black and the darker details with that brick, but I think the white windows are going, again,
Would you
even
go
new.
maybe like with an almond or something like that, a lighter color? Would you go darker? I think we have, in that vinyl line, I think I have 4 colors.
I think something a little bit darker. I mean, almond is a step in the right direction. White is just so reflective. When you stand back and you look, and it just
I
kinda-
think there's a gray in that line too.
Okay.
It's not a real dark gray. Any darker colors, when you get into vinyl windows, they have a lot of expansion and contraction. They
Sure.
try to, stay away from the, even though
I
they
hear you,
put
and
a
I know
lot
the
of
gray,
colors in
you
it.
have to see how it fits with your other grays. 'Cause
Yeah,
sometimes
right.
grays look good next to each other, sometimes they don't. But I would encourage you to go away from the stark white for those windows, because I think it just makes them look like they're misplaced.
Okay. What's that, the color on the left there? I can't read it from here, that light color.
City loft? They call it
City Loft, yeah.
yes.
These are Sherwin-Williams colors, that's what we use, so.
Okay.
The
even that-
almond would be a little bit darker than something like that, that's pretty popular in the vinyl windows. That might play off that color a little bit. I mean, we can look at, I think there's a gray, and I think I can get a green too, but that green, I don't think is gonna work for us on this.
Okay.
And we're trying to stay with the vinyl replacement just because of the cost. And, we start doing wood windows and custom windows. We can get these are all custom sizes, but with the manufacturer, we can go tip to tip and they custom make it right to exact inches that you want
Yeah. No, I
with the vinyl, so.
I think once you tone the color down a little bit, it will look more natural to, I mean, it actually might even look more like a wood window from the street.
Sure.
Is there gonna be any divisions on the windows, or just one over
We
one?
didn't plan on any, there isn't any currently in the building, and I don't have pictures of the original, you try to do a couple things on the original, but, if we're changing the color, that certainly would be an option to go with some grids in the glass, or at least, maybe the upper part.
Yeah, it's hard to guess. The next door on the Kaganza building, they went with, I think, a 4/4, if I saw.
We've got some really, I think 44, 46-inch wide windows, big double hungs going in there, so.
Yeah. Or did they go, no, they got 2/2 next door. 2/2. 2/2. I'm guessing, and again, I don't know if they have any historic photos, but in terms of the original design, they probably had some divisions. And I'm guessing, because the side windows here are so narrow, that if you went with a 2/2, split vertically like that, it would probably tie in real nice with the narrowness of these. But again, I don't know if I would require that, just because I don't even know. But I know you see that they're kind of 2/2 or a 4 style next door, and so that might tie. But again, it may be that they were 1/1 to begin with. so I'm not gonna push you one way or the other with there. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't the 8/8 or the 9/9 that was in that picture, because that
Well,
would be too many conditions.
I think moving forward, in regards to color, would be that dark almond, and I think there is like a chocolate milk color too. It's a brown, but it's more like a chocolate. It's not like a royal brown, a deep brown, but it's more like chocolate milk, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know if that would be something rather than the almond.
Yeah, I'll let your designer.
Okay,
I would just.
all
I
right.
would
We
push
want to
the-
get away from white and get
Get away
something more
from the
earthy
white.
than the white then.
I think it would just help make it a little bit more
A little softer
tied in.
presentation.
Not only, I think it'll tie in better with your color scheme.
Sure.
But also fit nicer with the building.
Okay.
And I only have one other last comment, and it relates to the sign. The picture, it's hard to see in this one. They must have, used to have a sign panel across the transoms.
Yeah, that's,
Down below.
there's one that's, let's see if you can,
There's a
right
picture
there,
there.
right there, that signboard,
Yes.
that's coming off. That was just
Okay.
bolted on.
So that's coming off.
Yeah, so we can get our full height in our entranceway.
Okay,
And there's a light that's in there now underneath there
Yep.
that we're replacing with a period type light.
Okay.
That'll just light the entranceway there. But yeah, that thing was bolted on. I think they had like, I don't know, some sort of signage there at one time, but
I'm guessing that's probably where they put it, and I know what we typically like to see is to at least see the shape of the transoms. I know you probably aren't bringing the transom glass back, but the, having the shape of the transom
right.
still
Yep,
there with
yep, that
sign
thing's
panel.
coming out. That, and then, like I said, their signage, I think there would probably be above the mailboxes there.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be mounted to the brick and, you know, it wouldn't come across the building. It would be more like the other ones on Main Street where they come out on the side there.
Projecting sign?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a number of different places where I think it would make sense on this building. One is up on the actual lintel that goes across the top of the storefront there. You could actually have, I think, the sign mounted there and hang down just a hair, because you probably want a little bit wider than that. You can also have them just in the space, in that transom space right above the window, but just not extending left and right. They would kind of just fit right in that transom square right above each of the windows is another good place. But I like the projecting or blade signs too.
There's quite a bit of repair on that projection detail there, where the apartment is above there that we're gonna be replacing some crown molds and a bunch of trims. That project was done, the trims and stuff, about 25 years ago. My dad and myself did it. I think Lyman Cantwell still owned the building back in those days, so that was quite a few years ago.
But otherwise, kudos, I like what you guys are doing.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? In your packet, you'll see staff notes and a recommendation. Any questions about that?
I want to say that I'm really glad to see that upper left corner getting fixed,
Yeah,
since I was resident in 143 West Main, which was right next door when the fire happened.
oh, is that right?
So whenever I go by that building and I see that thing, and I'm like, that corner is still not,
Yeah,
you
yep.
know, it's just, so I'm
So
really
we got
glad
really
to
good
see that
pictures
being
of it.
addressed.
We're gonna make it in our shop. We're just gonna make it out of wood and then paint it up. And then we took a mold of that cornice right there and we're actually doing some plastics with that, some heavy plastics, so we can match it just perfect. So, yeah.
Cool.
It's a little detail to it, but I think it's important, these, you know, when you're doing a building like this, you really need to get those little details back. You drive by it and see it all the time, and now that I've been looking at it, it's just like, you know, it pops out at you, yeah.
Any other questions? There is a resolution in the packet for consideration. No questions? Anybody feeling like they want to make a motion?
Motion to approve?
I'll second.
Okay, a motion by Bartlett and a second by Caravello. One last time for discussion. Go ahead, Rodney.
Is there an understanding about the window color being modified from what was submitted to?
Not white, we've gotta go with, an almond or a brown or something a little more earthy. I mean, I can, I guess throw the email out with a picture of it, just to circulate it around to make sure we're gonna be on the same page with what your thoughts are. But, we'll pull that white off there. It's not a big deal.
Very good.
Just, just to make sure this goes through without any further complication, I would say either the brown that you choose, excuse me, losing my voice here, or the dark almond, either one would
Okay.
be a very significant improvement, and I think not expensive, so.
Yeah, there's same
can
cost.
include that in
Yeah.
the actual motion in some way, just to,
Okay. Are you guys okay with that? Yeah. Include the window color in the motion?
that it,
That?
I guess the motion, if we have to amend it, or do you want to just slide
We'll
it?
just include it. Michael
Okay.
has the language already, so I think we're good on that. Anything else? Okay, otherwise, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Thank you very much, we
Gentlemen.
appreciate it. Okay. Item number 6 is discuss and make recommendations for the proposed ordinance amendments to section 78-517 in the downtown design overlay zoning district requirements. We're expecting Attorney Dragney to join us shortly. We can either begin the conversation or we can recess until he gets here. What would you guys like to do?
I think if you don't recess, you'll probably,
Repeat it. Are we expecting him relatively?
he said around 7:30. He thought he'd be
Okay.
here by 7:30. I haven't heard otherwise, so I just checked my phone.
And that's why we pushed the meeting back, is to try to accommodate his schedule, because he's been involved with this for a while. So-
I might just give a couple items for
Sure.
thought, so that while we're recessed, if the rest of the commissioners want to just take a look at a couple things that we discussed.
Sure.
One is, in the version that you have in front of you, I think one of the things that's going to come up, and we talked about in a meeting between Matt Dragney and the mayor and staff and myself this week, is as you look through the design standard section in particular, wherever it says should, is the discussion about whether that should be switched to shall. And I've kind of flagged them in mine, but I think Attorney Dragney brought up the fact that having shoulds in there makes it really difficult for the commission to act upon and for you to be able to enforce, because then it sounds like it's a maybe. And so we had discussed this week about having a discussion with all of you as commissioners about whether we should switch all those shoulds to shalls, or just take the language out, take the section out if it's just going to be a wishful thinking kind of a element within the ordinance.
What section is that in?
Design standard starts under 7, and it's from there to the end, pretty much. So anywhere you kind of see a should, think about whether you're comfortable with that switching to shall. And then the last section that I think I had the most trouble with, and that we, I think, struggled with in our meeting, was once you get to section P, other those under 7, the design guidelines, these particular paragraphs were borrowed from the design guidelines book and moved over. And I think that was based on our original discussions almost a year ago. And the more I look at those, we found that they ended up being more problematic, because not only were they more historic preservation based rather than just design quality, which we're trying to clean up in this ordinance, but they become much more educational than actually ordinance language. And I actually, and we can get to this when Attorney Dragney shows back up, I kind of took a step back, because you get kind of lost in all this. I think the majority of P on, section P, or paragraphs P on, actually can fit in some of the earlier sections. And I've got recommendations later on where we can just pull out a sentence or two that we think we still need and stick it in earlier paragraphs that were actually already covered. And we could actually go through some of those, but I think Attorney Dragney may want to hear that as well. But in particular, I think if you look at T, windows, and all that language there, for me, a good portion of that can just go away. And there's just a couple places where I think you can move a few things over into another section. Same thing with doors and some of these other ones. It becomes repetitive. So if you guys want to look at those two sections, then I think that might speed things up once Attorney Dragnet gets here.
Okay, anybody else have any thoughts or comments? I know Commissioner Seltzer has to leave at 7:45, so when we get started, if he has anything, we'll try to let him go first, or if not, we'll continue the discussion, and, you know, at some point, he'll probably have to leave. But we did meet earlier, what was it, last week we met, late last week, and tried to go through and streamline and talk about the areas that Todd mentioned with the words should, or there's some that are, might say encouraged, and those type of words that are in there. And then the other thing we tried to do was take on the question of demolition and how we want to handle that. So that'll be something else that Attorney Dragnet can kind of walk us through when he gets here. Did you have something, Greg?
Yeah, okay, design standards, it says right there, shall conform. So does that supersede anything else that follows? What if, you know, because it's saying right there, the design standards shall conform, or the project shall conform to design standards. So,
Yeah, but then if you
Anyth-
move into them, it
yeah,
doesn't.
but that's what I'm saying, so does that,
At the very back.
Yeah, because then, if you, for example, look at window hoods, just for example, V, for repair existing windows is encouraged. It's not a,
Yeah.
yeah,
it's not a statement of requirement.
yeah. I guess my other question then would be for Rodney is by having it set up that way and, you know, replacing all of the shoulds with shall as requested there, does that limit what you can do, or does that limit what someone coming forward with a project can do? I mean, do we have the ability to
Let's listen. Thanks.
make an exception?
Shells are generally mandatory unless there's explicit language allowing otherwise.
Yeah, so I mean, that's going to limit what a person can do.
I think it's just seven, I think.
Okay, so that means then that these standards have to be accurate completely.
Right, or they shouldn't be in there, is
Yeah.
kind of the conversation that we had, because if you leave it so wishy-washy, then if somebody does something and you don't like it, you really can't enforce it anyway, so why even have it in there? You might as well just take it
But
out.
we definitely need to have the standards. But I'm concerned that we're not going to be allowing somebody some leeway. I don't know how to word that, how you would do that to give somebody leeway to, you know, if they got a good project going, but it can't meet the standards because of what they want to do.
Well, the idea would be is that they would understand what the standards are before they submit their project. And then,
This is pertaining to
You
downtown
know.
overlay anyways.
what's that?
This is basically pertaining to
Right,
downtown
it's
overlay, yeah.
pertaining to downtown overlay. And to make it
And
clear
that's
what the
where-
expectations are, so when they
That-
hire an architect, you know, hopefully they only have to do it once.
Yeah.
And save them the trouble of going back and
I'm
forth,
fine with that, that'll work for me.
okay? And then, you know, the other thought is, as Todd mentioned, is the historic references we basically took out of here because they're gonna be covered under chapter 38, and I know there's gonna be an effort to approach some of the business owners to talk about that, and a lot of them are already local landmarks anyway. But for a gentleman like that just came in here, if that one, you know, falls in the overlay, then he can just simply look at the ordinance, and we really streamlined it. We pared it down and got rid of all the confusing language as far as it is, is it contributing or non-contributing and those types of things. And I think it'll be easier for somebody that wants to do a project to understand. And I think that's fair. Did you have something, Tom?
Yeah, I kind of like, I think it's Greg's point, is that the heading of the category says shall. And then under that are it should do this, it should do this, it should do this. That leaves a little flexibility for when we get in a situation where it's doing something really positive for what we're trying to accomplish. And yet, with the should in there, it gives us some flexibility to say, okay, you don't have to do if you do these different things, and this would be very difficult to do, it just seems like maybe we've defined it enough by saying they shall do these things, and then should. It leaves a little flexibility for action. If we put shall on every one of those individual things, maybe it's something that just doesn't work for that property, and we have some leeway then. That's another way of looking at it.
I can't speak for Attorney Dragney, but we had a real similar discussion earlier this week, and his concern as an attorney is that you can't enforce any shoulds. And it also creates ambiguity to have it all kick off with shall, but then as you go into the descriptions, now you don't see shall anymore, you see should, then there's ambiguity between how it kicks off and what's going on the interior. Now, I think one of the things, I don't know if we're going to want to go should by should by should, but in most cases, I think there already is some built-in flexibility. And I'll just give you an example. If we just start with building setback as an example, there's two shoulds in that paragraph. The second one says, in blocks where setbacks are not uniform, the function and design of neighboring buildings, let's say we say shall, be taken into account when determining setbacks. It's not hard and fast in terms of how you're actually taking it into account. It just says you have to take it into account.
You have to at least make the effort.
Yeah, so that's a shall, it's saying you at least look at it, and we should at least talk about it, but it's not saying exactly how. It leaves you that flexibility for then, now that
it's
you've
not
taken it into
possible.
account, how does it play out? See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in most cases, because these are design guidelines rather than, and we've made a lot of effort already, of making them more toward design kinds of criteria versus historic preservation, which with historic preservation, if you say shall, then you're treating it as a landmark already, and you're saying, okay, if you have a cornice on the building, then you have to bring it back exactly the way it was, and it was shall.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't leave any flexibility. And so I think with the shift already from trying to have this be a preservation standard and making it a design quality standard, I think that gives us more flexibility, and it gives the property owner more flexibility as well.
That sounds good.
Okay, anything else, or did you have something, Greg?
Just a quick question on that building setback. It also says here in the last sentence, the zoning ordinance must be given consideration.
Other restrictions.
Does that, I'm sorry,
Says other restrictions outlined in the zoning ordinance must be
Yeah.
given consideration.
other restrictions?
But you gotta
right,
follow
right.
the other rules.
Should that must be shall as well? I mean, are we gonna take it to that extreme or what?
Well, any zoning standard has to be applied, these are zoning standards.
Yep.
So, there are setback requirements of particular districts, so there will be setback requirements that'll have to be met.
Anything else you want to cover, or otherwise we can take 5 and I'll try to reach out to Matt and see if he's in the neighborhood. All right, seeing none, we'll take a quick recess then and come back in a few. Okay, so we'll reconvene this meeting, and city attorney is tied up, so he probably won't make it. But I think we can at least continue the discussion, and if there's any changes that you want to make, we can take the feedback and then review them and bring them back at the next one. I didn't know if we'd really get a final approval on this tonight anyway. There are a couple people that are here that are interested. Would you like to hear from them? I know it's not really noticed for public hearing, but these are people that are experts in this area.
Waive the rules.
Yeah.
You're willing to waive the rules?
Waive the
Okay,
rules.
the rules are waived. Who would like to be first? Or is it one and only?
Thanks, everybody.
Sure.
Nice work. This is dramatically improved. I just had a few quick questions, and you guys can take or ignore them, whatever you want to do. And mostly I'm asking because I know that once the stuff gets into an ordinance, that's not the time to go back and say, oh, this isn't defined correctly. So I thought I'd say something now. And so one of the things is number 3I, the definition of transom. It's just a little bit of a narrow definition. It's really talking about the glass, the window space above the storefronts, which is accurate, but transoms are windows, and you can have a transom above a door, you can have a transom above a second floor window, you can have a transom above a third floor window. So unless Main Street doesn't have any transoms above windows or doors, I mean, I think they've got some over doors, but that definition is just a little bit narrow, and so I thought I'd point it out. That you can have transoms above doors and windows as well as storefronts.
Sure.
The definition language, I think, Michael, you were extracted that from somewhere, but I don't remember where.
Yeah,
That goes,
probably the design guideline.
Okay.
Understood.
So we can certainly tweak that if that's what you like us to do. I'm sure there's more than one definition out there, so we can either look for one, or if you have one that you would suggest, you can email it to us and we'll consider that.
Okay, I
That
can do
work?
that, and that way you can just look at it, and if you like it, you can keep it, and if you don't like it, you can throw it away.
yeah, I think one of the things that, I like your improvement. I think it's probably the, above the shop door and including the shop windows is probably where it's gonna come into play more often. I don't remember seeing any above, like upper floor windows any other place. But I think you're right that you do have transoms above shop doors in
Right.
instances.
Right.
I think what makes this a little bit confusing, and it threw me the first time I read through, is the glazed panels. Because there's a lot of different styles of transom too. And
Yep.
they refer, glazing is used in a lot of the language throughout the rest of the ordinance, referring to just the setting of the glass.
Uh-huh.
That kind of glazing. It's not,
The glass.
we often think of a glazed,
Yeah.
like a smoked glass, and I think that throws things off a little
Yeah.
bit. So it might be good to look at that term glaze in
Yeah.
this as well.
Because a lot of times glazing, people are just referring to a piece of glass,
Right.
so, yeah.
Okay,
Then, okay, so then my next question is about number 5, B5. That's under, the subheading is renovation, and number 5. And it's asking for a written explanation regarding how the proposed alteration will conform to the next section, which is the design standards. And so my only question is that perhaps that could be a little more specific, and I mean, if you want that in there, perhaps it can be a little more specific and say a written explanation referencing the applicable design standards regarding how the proposed alteration will conform. Because what we've had in the past is there's been a comment about this in the ordinance, and what we had in the past is someone submitting a written explanation that basically goes like this. This project conforms to the ordinance because it conforms to the ordinance. And, you know, we've had that sort of circular explanation before. And so perhaps if it's just a little bit more explicit about how they have to explain how it conforms, and so perhaps just written explanation referencing all applicable design standards or something like that, just so that there's something for you guys to go back to that they have to address
Yes.
in their explanation. So it's not just, I think, because it is.
I think that's good. I know staff, one of the things the staff has done for the commission in the past, and when you guys write up your comments, you refer to specific standards. And that's always helpful to me. But you're right that the person submitting the proposal, I don't think they always turn it in referencing the specific standards. Okay.
And then my next question is about, it's in the design standards, so number 7, J, number 7J, so that's exterior materials. And then down toward like 1 or 2. And so I noticed here that you talk about preferred materials, which is awesome, and also things that should not be permitted, which also is great. And I was wondering if you'd consider adding to the list of not permitted materials, I wonder if you'd consider EFS is not permitted on street-facing facades.
Again?
Yeah, you might want to define that for.
EIFS.
Exterior installation.
I was
It's
just,
essentially covered insulation.
yeah.
Okay.
Stucco comes to mind. It's not
Yes,
the same, but
it's like, yes, it's these sheets of insulation, and then they sort of spray this stucco material over it, and it looks very, very cheap, and it fails really quickly, and it sucks moisture, and so it holds water, and which contributes to its failure rate after a certain number of years. It's very, very inexpensive, which is why people like to use it, and it's horrible.
Well,
My opinion, sorry.
EFS
Yeah.
can be treated to keep the moisture from penetrating
Uh-huh,
the exterior EFS.
yeah.
I think that's what you're talking about, is the EFS.
EFS. Well, there's all kinds of different materials. There's dry-vit, and
Okay,
there's
but it's
EFS,
the
and
installation with like a stucco material on it, and
yeah, yeah,
you're right that at one time they found out it was rotting stuff underneath because the moisture was penetrating. And in more recent years, they've developed it so that it blocks the moisture from going in and just basically just destroying what was the
Yeah.
subsurface.
I think that one of the other concerns that I have is that you guys are making a huge leap forward in having quality on Main Street, and I think that that ties into having a certain standard for the materials on Main Street, and that if we want to have quality on Main Street, whether EFS has a vapor barrier or not just doesn't really cut it.
Doesn't cut the, yeah. I was
But you
only
guys, it's-
clarifying your statement
Oh,
about the
okay.
moisture.
Thank
I
you.
wasn't recommending it by no means.
Okay, thank you.
Is it a stucco and drive-it issue though as well? I mean, because I think there's always.
Or drive it, EFS, that's all the same
Yeah, I
thing.
mean,
Yeah.
so I think if we can, to be clear, I mean, we can put that under the siding, number 2, siding category. We could create an additional category since it's not really masonry, it's not really siding, it's not really glazing. So you're suggesting adding another number that would deal with materials such as ephes and stucco and drive-in.
Well, I think that, I don't know if we have any actual, real stucco on Main Street.
But we don't want it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like if there was a building that was historically constructed with real stucco,
Yes, I got you.
I mean, real stucco is a very high quality material. It's all the imitation stuff that's not.
Yes.
We have a picture on the board. We think this is probably the closest thing we have to it.
The top part of the Giganza Plaza is probably your IFAS type material. I'm
Yeah.
assuming it is.
That's what it looks like when I drove by and looked at the building adjacent to it. That's what that looked like.
So I guess, if that's something that the commission wants to talk about now, or if we want to come back to these items, or what would you like to do?
I think in terms of the kinds of issues that I see districts facing, that's as appropriate to have in here as the vinyl siding and the asphalt shingles and some of the other categories. And so I'd have no problem extending it to include that kind of material as being something that's not allowed. But I think it needs to be a separate number, because I don't think it fits neatly under the other three categories.
Okay, anybody else? Greg?
I'd have to agree with that too. It's, I don't think that that type of construction, well, even if it was, of the original material, masonry type, I don't think that were too many buildings built like that on Main Street, if any. So I'd say that would be in keeping with Main Street, the idea of Main Street.
All right, anybody else have any thoughts on that one, or are we good with that? Okay. Keep going, you're on a roll.
Okay. And then I am, let's see. I think it's just the same section moving through the pages to letter Q, where it says transoms.
Tough call. I mean, we'll probably still be here, but.
And this is something that I'm just going to request you guys. I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but I'm just putting it out there. And the request is that to have the ordinance state that historic prism glass be retained. Historic prism glass is it's like, you'll see it, little small squares like this size, and it's located in the window above storefronts. And so the little panes of glass is prism because it reflected light, and it was a design feature before there was a lot of electric light. And so the prisms would reflect sunlight into the store through that transom level window. And transom glass, the prism glass historic prism glass is not only quite beautiful, but it's becoming quite rare. And it's a beautiful character defining feature of historic storefronts. And I completely understand you guys are not doing, historic preservation here. But we've had a project in the last couple of years where a building owner tore out their prism glass transom for no reason. I mean, there was no reason. And the reasons they talk about are energy efficiency, or they don't have money to repair them. But But you can also just retain them in place and put a storm window behind them on the inside of the store. So if you're worried about energy efficiency or if they're in bad condition, you can just leave them alone and put a storm window in front of them inside the store. And then someone in the future can restore them or repair them. But once they're ripped out, they're gone. And we are losing them on Main Street. And so if there's a way to either encourage or just say historic prism glass shall be retained, that would be awesome, but
Do we have, are there multiple locations where that's in place downtown
yes,
that still remain?
yes.
Yeah.
So that's my request to encourage or to let people know that we're not going to tear out our historic prism glass and those transoms.
I don't disagree with you, but I know what Attorney Dragney's going to say. He's going to say that makes it a preservation ordinance. And what he told us this week in our meetings was, if that's a goal of the community, then we should put together an incentive program targeting those prism and go at it from a different direction, rather than having it be in the ordinance, and particularly this ordinance, saying it's
Yeah.
required that you keep your prism. And I've worked with a lot of communities where the property owner, against my best wishes and my advice, in the middle of the night, tears it out and throws it away, and it's gone. Which it's awful, but I just don't know if we can do it in this particular ordinance. Now,
Could we just encourage people to keep it?
I like that idea as
There's-
well, but every time I try to go that direction, Attorney Dragney
Not
made it clear.
enforceable.
He said it's not.
Right, no, exactly.
He
I
said
mean,
he-
it's just like,
Yeah,
it's just recognizing it and.
It confuses the language. But there's a place where I think we can cover it to some extent. And it gets into some of the suggestions I'm gonna make later about the transoms section, where once you get to P, Q, and R, as you go through there, these are borrowed from a preservation ordinance, and we're still trying to get them to mesh appropriately with design quality. And where transoms come into play is if you go earlier in the guidelines under horizontal bands,
Yep,
the transom is one of the horizontal bands.
yep,
And we say clearly there, wherever possible, existing horizontal bands shall be retained. And I think we need to say that from a should to a shall. So essentially, we got to maintain that design quality, those bands, and there might be an ability to make reference to prism glass there. And you know, wherever, not only retained, but I think uncovered where possible. Because a lot of places, we don't know that we have prism glass
Yeah.
because it's behind a panel,
yeah,
because they've put in some kind of wood panel that's painted.
yeah.
In fact, the building that we just looked at tonight may have, I don't know, I haven't looked inside, but that's typically where you might find prism glass. So I think that's an area where we can say that band needs to be retained, and we can at least have a conversation as a commission about the importance of that design element, just to the way the architect originally laid the building out.
Yeah.
So I think that's the place we could put it.
That's all I have.
That's all you have?
That's all I have.
That's pretty
Yeah,
good.
I know, you guys did a great job.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me ask these questions and consider some of these ideas. I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate all your work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else out there interested? Okay. So do you want to lead in your suggestions? Attorney Dragney is on his way. Probably be, I don't know, 10 minutes maybe?
I could certainly, the first part's, I think, gonna go really quick.
Okay,
And so I can just give you my recommendation as I look at it, and there's a couple places, but the other thing we can do is, because I think it's gonna get, and it was just kind of one of those aha moments when I was going through this version, because I didn't even catch it when I was making my edits from the earlier version, on how those later sections, P on, PQR, really can be integrated, and I think work a lot better. And so that's gonna get kind of messy in terms of editing, and it might just be, that's gonna have to be one of those things we try to change and we come back and look at again. But before that, I personally would recommend that in almost every case, we substitute shall for where should is present within these paragraphs. There's very, I don't think, there's only maybe one or two where I would even question it.
You're still focusing on parent 7?
Yeah, because I think, I'm trying to think if there was any other changes I had earlier that needed to be discussed.
well, there's some in B under renovation, and then C under structural projects.
Yeah,
And
there were some
those words were recommended or may be required, and I don't know if that's the same as should or shall.
Yeah, that was my question.
You had the same question?
Well, or it says may, what is that?
So if you look at under renovation, which is 5B and then number 2, and it's talking about a clear depiction of existing appearance of the property, and then it says clear color photographs are recommended. And to me, it should be whenever possible, or, you know, I mean, if you say shall and they're not available,
Yeah,
but recommended means, well, even if you have them, you don't necessarily have to use them,
yeah.
you know, and I guess that's up to the group to see how far we want to take this thing.
They should always be able to produce clear color photographs today.
I would think so.
And something like that one, that seems like low-hanging fruit. You could make that a requirement. Instead of recommended are required. I mean,
Right.
That's,
Yeah, I mean, I think you could really make it simple and just say a clear depiction of the existing appearance of the property, including clear color photographs.
are required.
Are required. And then the same thing with number 3, where it's talking about the replacement of architectural components are recommended for this purpose. You know, do we feel the same way about that one?
Yeah, I like to see the paint chips.
So we could change all the recommended to required?
I think so. I wasn't even looking there, but I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So you'll see that in 3, and then toward the bottom of 3, and then it also is talking about alteration or replacement. It says may be required. No, that one is talking about drawings, and, I mean, I guess it comes down to what we want to see from the applicant.
Well, I think isn't that as appropriate? I mean, I think the reason it says may be required, isn't it in part that not all projects are gonna involve those?
Could be.
But is it a situation where if it does involve it, then they need to provide it? So it's almost like as it's applicable versus it may be required. But that, I think it's probably easier for staff or Steve Kittleson to answer that particular question.
Well, you're gonna need dimension plans for things that are code requirement. A lot of these things are really aesthetic, you know.
Okay.
You know, some of these are aesthetic, not necessarily building safety codes.
Mhm.
And then under structural projects, which is C number 2, there again, it's talking about clear photographs are recommended, so it's kind of the same thing there.
Well, what about if we, under structural projects there, in item 2, we do the similar requirement for the clear depiction of the property, the photographs, so that part
I'm
becomes
thinking.
required. But then the scale and dimensional drawings, make them recommended, and then they may also be required by the city.
Okay.
Because I think I think in a lot of cases, it would be recommended that they provide drawings of those other kinds of elements for us to see. And then the same for 3.
Right.
Say that they are recommended and may be required by the city.
Okay. That's all I had in those areas, and then you were gonna go to design standards, is that where you're starting?
Yeah, I mean, if you want, we can go should by should and go through it. But I think it pretty much wholesale from 7A on.
Yeah, the question would be, is we either change it to should, or should we remove it? And
As
is
I
there
look,
anything that you thought should be removed?
yes, but not until we get to P.
Okay,
I think up until that point, I think everything, as I look at it, because that was originally written as a design criteria, I'm personally pretty comfortable with just switching it to shall. There's a few things that I might tweak a little bit that I can tell you about if you guys are interested.
okay,
One is looking at building height.
Okay.
And so under design standards, B, under building height, the very last should there, it says, for construction or alterations on corners, building height, now it currently says should be, but if we change it to shall be similar to that of buildings on the adjoining corners. And just a red flag kind of went off for me because I didn't get a chance to go through corner by corner. And if there was a corner where you actually had, like for example, the corner that has the theater, which is a lower story building, but the other corners are a little bit more grand in nature, then I think we probably cover wanting to keep that corner. If, let's say, the movie theater is taken out and something builds, I think there's enough there on the other 3 corners that we would interpret this to say we kind of have to have a grand building height there to kind of match the other 3. But if there was another corner within the downtown where we had like 3 lower story buildings and someone wanted to come in with a more typical high one, we wouldn't allow it under this because it would be just, it would say we shall compare it to the other 3 corners. You know what I'm saying? So it struck me as maybe we have to be more clear or at least more protective of the assumption that the other 3 corners are going to be in good shape and interpret this as being, if I'm being clear. So I think we just have to work on the wording for that one a little bit just to make sure we don't run into any issue.
Just the building height, this one.
Yeah, it's just that very last, for construction or alterations on corners, building height should be similar to that of buildings on the adjoining corners. I just think that could potentially create issues. I think,
By making a shell.
yeah.
But
So I think we can have it be a shall, but then I think we need to be more clear that what we're trying to accomplish are these grand corner buildings, which are talked about in the sentence before that. Just in case you're not, I don't want them to incorrectly, well, let's use another example. Let's say someone wants to build where they're taking down the house across from the library. Right now, right across the street in Maine, there's a vacant lot. Kitty Corner, that building has already been reduced in size, if I remember. Oh, no, that's the.
2-story.
That is 2-story, and then you got the library. So there it's 50-50. 2 of the corners are a little bit more grand, but the other one is vacant, so, how are you gonna interpret it? And so I think I think it would be better to tie it into the wording that's in the sentence prior to that. And I'm not gonna, it's just a flag, I haven't come up with the wording yet, but if you guys are in agreement, I think we can play with the wording there. The other is building width. C, the next one I should say, it says the regular 25-foot interval of the Main Street Commercial District. I don't know when this was originally created, if there was actually a study done on the standard width. But I know typically in districts I work with, there is some variation. It might vary from 20 foot to 25 foot, or maybe even 15 to 25. But they tend to average around 20 to 25. It seems like in this section here that we're requiring every single building to be 20 foot wide or to have panels that are 25 foot wide, which doesn't seem to offer any kind of flexibility to the space. Does that make sense? So I think we almost need to have a little bit of a range there. I mean, we want narrow, the regular narrow interval in the Main Street Commercial District, and then maybe have a range of whatever it seems appropriate. But I'm guessing they're not all exactly 25 foot wide.
No, but 22 feet is a lot of the lot widths downtown are 22 feet.
22?
wide.
Yeah.
So I mean, it seems like if you even just had a range of 20 to 25 feet, at least it gives you more leeway to deal with sight as it relates to those intervals. Did he come in and step back out? I'll talk more about the horizontal bands section later, but I think in this particular case, you'll see where they're talking about the horizontal rhythms that are created vertically, I mean, as you go along the buildings. And I think that's the place where you make reference to the storefront cornice, the lintel, the transom areas, all those kinds of things. And I think those sections can be pulled over and just included there as design elements that are horizontal. And the same thing with the vertical rhythms under F, you'll see reference to windows and doors. And I think we can pull out specific sentence from the windows and doors section to pull them in as relates to the vertical rhythms of the windows and the doors. So I think that'll be cleaned up. I would recommend, as I looked at this, I don't know how many times I've read this, but G and H, rhythms of solids and voids and the solid-void relationship, to me, for clarity purpose, I don't see why we have those as two separate paragraphs. I think they can be combined. Because I think in some cases they're repetitive, and I don't know what the distinction might be to make them separate, unless someone else sees it.
Sorry about the delay.
That's okay, you're a busy man.
It was
So,
busy today.
kind of where we're at is Peggy offered a few suggestions, which I think people pretty much agree with. Nothing major, just some clarification.
Okay.
And that as a group, we've kind of agreed with your opinion that anything that said should be changed to shall. And then Todd was walking us through some recommendations in some areas where we think we might be able to combine some sections, things that are basically have the same subject, and instead of having them in two areas in the ordinance, combining them, and he was going to walk us through those.
Sounds good.
All right? Do you have a copy with you?
I
can give you mine if you don't.
I don't have a hard copy. I can pull it up on my screen.
I can give you this one.
Okay.
It's a little bit scribbled on, but
Okay.
I'll give you the idea.
Somebody's been taking notes up to this point, I assume?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're, which section do you want to start at?
7.
I think I'm on G and H, so 7,
Right
G and
here.
H.
Thank you.
So I just mentioned that for me, as I was trying to figure out the distinction between rhythm of solids and voids and solid-void relationship, I was having trouble distinguishing why they needed to be two paragraphs, and so I suggest merging those two to kind of clean it up, because they almost just repeat. And again, I would volunteer to just do the next round of editing
Drafting.
again, as long as we're in agreement that it makes sense to do these. With roof forms, I realized that I missed a preserved here. It says it is very important that cornices and parapets be preserved with an ongoing program of maintenance. In the spirit of the rest of the changes that we're making, I think it makes more sense to say it is very important that cornices and parapets be maintained. And that's essentially what we're talking about there. And that cleans that up. And then it says, if we're switching the shall, this is one of the places where I get a little uncomfortable with the switch to shall. When necessary, cornices shall be replaced with identical forms. And again, I think that's might be a little bit more restrictive than what we have in mind. So it could be visually similar, we've talked about in other places, or visually matching forms. Because as we were talking about tonight, he's replacing it with a different kind of material. It's a fiberglass material or a plastic material. In other cases, it's wood. And I think whenever you have identical, I think that really handcuffs the ability to deal with new materials. The other should here, which would be the third should in that roof forms paragraph, is related to decoration of the roof line by use of special materials and decorative details. Should use examples of other buildings on Main Street as a guide. I think that's one that probably could stay should rather than a shall, because that's just kind of, I think, providing a little bit more help to the person interpreting the ordinance, or it might be that that sentence goes out. But I think to say it shall isn't, I don't think, what we intended for that particular should. Does that make sense? Last paragraph there, I'm having a little trouble with the second sentence. Original architectural features which give the roof its essential character, including dormer, windows, cupolas, cornices, brackets, chimneys, weather vanes, again, shall be preserved if in keeping with buildings in the immediate area as determined by the Plan Commission. Again, this is now strained from being a preservation, or from being a design guideline to being a preservation criteria. And so I want to know from the commission whether we even need that whole sentence.
And then when we talked the other day, the use of the word original creates some question. What does that mean?
Yes, yes. And so this sentence, I think, is still problematic. And we could take it out, but if there are elements here that I think are, and again, I don't know the district as well as maybe some people here, even in the audience. If there are clearly some design elements such as dormers, cupolas, weather vanes, those kinds of things that need to be addressed, I think this would need to be rewritten as a design criteria, or just take it out of this particular ordinance. So I don't know if do you think these elements need to still be addressed, but kind of switch to a design?
Well, perhaps if there's an official survey, if any of these types of features exist on Main Street,
Yeah.
they should be acknowledged. But if they don't exist, then we're sort of discussing something that
Right.
we don't have.
Sometimes language is borrowed from other communities and other ordinances that really don't necessarily apply. So I don't remember seeing a lot of weather vanes in the district. So I'll star that one, and I'll take another stab at pulling out what I think might be design elements, but it was one that I saw I missed earlier. Exterior materials. We have a new approach rather than, again, the word original and preservation. I'm going to go to the sentence here that is still showing the editing changes, where it says, any new materials used shall match as closely as possible either the existing materials or the materials used at the time the building was originally constructed. Okay, so we're hoping you guys are all comfortable with that. But later, we run into the sentence, when the cost or availability of material that match original materials make their use prohibitive, and when alternate materials can visually match original materials. I think that's, a lot of that needs to be struck and taken out. And I think I would move elements of that sentence right up behind the earlier one, because I think they'll work better together. And so I can make that change. And then, Mayor, you and I had talked about this on Saturday. I started looking up and down the street here in this, that next sentence in the middle of the two that we just talked about. It says, new buildings shall be constructed with street-facing facades of brick or stone. And we discussed this last week, and originally I was very comfortable with that. But then I started thinking about the new museum that went up on the edge of the district, which is still within the overlay district. We would not have been able to build that building because it would have required masonry. And that's a pretty significant building. I don't think we would want that not to be there, but it's wood frame. And you go to the block closer to the bridge, and I don't remember what number block that is, but there are a number of wood frame structures on that block as well. And so I think this particular sentence needs to be written in a way that's a little bit more similar to the way building height was addressed, where it says you have to take into account the rest of the block. And you look at the height of other buildings. And so if the rest of the block is full of wood frame structures, then maybe we allow wood frame structures. Do you see what I'm getting at? Now, I know historically there was a reason why there was a switch made from wood frame to brick, and masonry was fire protection. And but nowadays, with all the other fire codes, I think that's going to be addressed no matter how the structure's built. And I don't think Steve Killis is going to let a wood frame structure go in that's doesn't have fire separation and everything else. So does that make sense to kind of play with that a little bit? I mean, I want the majority, particularly on the interior blocks, to be brick and masonry. But I think there's just parts of this district where it's going to throw a loop.
Just to point out, the historic district doesn't go to the other side of the river, though. So the Norwegian Heritage Center wouldn't have been covered in the downtown design overlay district.
It doesn't cross the bridge at all?
Right.
Okay.
Just so when you're
All right.
reading about
Well, then it,
applicable buildings.
all right. Then it may not be as much of an issue. But if you don't,
Relevant, but I just
Okay.
wanted to point that out.
all right, thank you. That helps. We good so far? Under masonry, in those exterior materials, I think we need to be clear that we're talking about the street-facing facades. And so, I think there's reference to that earlier, but I think since we're talking about masonry here in stone and brick, I think we need to actually come out and say, shall not be permitted on street-facing facades. Because they would be, the cinder block, concrete slab, I think would be fine for the rear of the building or the interior sidewall or something like that. Exterior surfaces, K. It's the second paragraph labeled number 2. It says, throughout the district, avoid cluttering facades. Unnecessary signs shall also be avoided. But then at the very end, it says, inconsistent with buildings within the immediate area is also prohibited. And I guess Attorney Dregnan, I'd be interested in when it says avoid, is that something that is enforceable, or should
That sounds permissive to me.
should those sentences be changed to?
Avoid is different than prohibit, in my mind.
I'd rather see within those changes, say, throughout the district, cluttering building facades with brackets, is prohibited. Unnecessary signs are also prohibited, rather than just saying avoid them. Does that make? Because then we're also consistent through the paragraph.
I agree with that.
Okay. Same thing in awnings. We have, again, avoid awnings with a curved profile. So again, take out the not historically appropriate, because I missed that one, and just say awnings with a curved profile are prohibited. And then I wanted to ask you about acceptable. The next sentence is lighting of awnings from behind is not acceptable. Is that?
I would again say is prohibited.
Okay. Good. So I think there's reference here, awnings shall project no more than 4 to 7 feet. I'm not sure if you're saying no more than, why you have a range there. So,
Should say no more than 7 feet.
7 feet, that's what I was thinking. Is that, otherwise, if you start falling in the middle there, then you're saying, well, it's no more than 4. Yeah, but we said 7, and, okay. Good, we're on the same page there. Under M, exterior colors, I think we had touched on this in our meeting last week. Colors shall relate in a positive way to the existing materials found on the facade. I want to add in there especially the masonry, because I think we ran into this issue that, well, are we trying to tie into the colors that might have been a painted surface that was added later? And I think the original intent was that we want all colors to coordinate. That's the primary goal from a design perspective. But the masonry seems to be such a crucial element, the color of that masonry. And then underneath, in the subparagraphs there, 2 and 3, when it talks about color combination schemes shall be limited. For me, I think we have to be a little bit more clear that we're talking about the overall facade color combination scheme, because otherwise, I think it could be incorrectly interpreted here that on the entire facade or the building, you can only use 3 colors. And a lot of signs now are full 4-color signs that have lots of color in them. And I don't think we're trying to get away from that kind of stuff, but what we're talking about is the overall facade color scheme. We don't want painted ladies with, 7 different trim element colors. But I think there's going to be other colors on the building for business signage and those kinds of things.
So you want to make it clear that this limitation on the number of different colors applies only to certain elements of the structure?
The overall facade color combination scheme. So it's relating, like tonight we had a proposal where they said, these are the 3 colors we're using for all the trim material and all the main wood structures.
So what are you leaving out with that description? Just signs?
Signage is the primary one. But again, is the brick itself considered to be part of the color scheme? Well, no, we're just kind of talking about, it's the overall design scheme for the facade elements that you're painting. And I'm not sure exactly how best to word that, but the way it's worded now, particularly it says no more than 3 different colors for all the structures
And appurtenances.
and
on it,
appurtenances on the property. And what if a property has 2 different buildings? Now it's basically saying that you have to paint both buildings exactly the same, and I don't think that's what we'd have in mind either. So I would say for each structure on the property, rather than, and not deal with the appurtenances in this particular paragraph, when we're limiting it to only 3 colors. Does that make sense?
Why don't you give it a crack, take a run at it when because you're going to go through and make a lot of changes.
Yeah,
And,
I've got this all marked up
Yeah.
and ready to go, so.
I mean, it sounds like you have a clear idea of what you'd like to say, so.
Okay. Under signage, there's a couple other places we have an avoid that we can switch over, and any signage placed over features on a second-story facade are not appropriate. I think we would say are prohibited there again. And then this is where it gets to be a mess, and you missed out on this, Attorney Dragney. From P, Q, R, and on, as I read through these, they are still much more preservation prescriptive. And as I looked at them, the light bulb went off that we actually already covered most of this stuff earlier in other sections. So like under storefront, cornice, and lintel, from a design element, the reason that's important is because it's a horizontal band.
And so it's addressed earlier under horizontal.
It's addressed earlier. I think we have to just be more clear under horizontal bands to say such as storefront, cornice, or lintel. And there may be just one, and again, I'll leave it up to the commission, but so that first sentence could be completely struck because we already covered it earlier then. But we may still want to keep, if the cornice has been removed through changes made to the storefront over time, a horizontal division can be achieved by replacing or simulating the cornice and or incorporating it into the signboard. that could be a sentence that could be moved then to the horizontal band, if it was something that we still wanted to have as part of our design criteria.
And do you want to say can be achieved or shall be achieved?
If it's in there, it probably needs to say shall.
If it's a guide, if it's a requirement,
Yes. I'd be comfortable saying a horizontal division shall be achieved by replacing or simulating the cornice and or incorporating it into the signboard. But again, I think that maybe you guys will have to see it once it's moved and in that context. But if I'm gonna move it over, I guess I probably will put the shall in there, and then you guys can see if that's something you're comfortable leaving in. With transom, I would also move that to horizontal bands. And I would probably only keep, within that whole context, keep the second there where it's talking about, rather than when it says when the original transom is missing or destroyed, because now we're talking about original. I'll say if building design called for a transom, it shall be replaced with a similar frame and pattern in matching or visually matching materials, and move that. But the rest of it, I think, is already covered in the way we handle the prescription that horizontal bands shall be retained. It's already there, and that's a horizontal band. Same thing, the storefront spandrels, that is a part of the solid void discussion. Those two paragraphs, the rhythm of solid and voids and the solid void relationship. This particular paragraph relates to those, again, the requirement that you shall retain the large storefront windows, because the spandrel is the part underneath that storefront window. And so I think that would be moved into that section. Same thing with building cornices and parapets, S. I would combine that with roof forms, because that's essentially where that's already covered. And then windows would go into the rhythm and void relationship, I believe mostly, although they're also under vertical rhythms. That one is such a large section, I can't tell you exactly where I would move all the elements, but rather than having windows separate, I think there might be a couple elements that would go under solids and voids, and a couple that might go under the vertical rhythms. And the second paragraph under windows, I think would all go away. Because as I look at it, it is,
restoration or,
yeah,
yeah.
it's not something I think we can say shall to. It's more of a desired preservation. Although I think you might want to keep that very last sentence of that paragraph, which is frames for new windows should be divided to match original window divisions, although we wouldn't use original. Or should be based on divisions typical of that building type, I think is probably more along the lines.
The second part of the sentence?
Yeah. Because that's, I don't think, covered anywhere else.
Okay.
Doors, very little of that I think would stay, other than when a door exists, it should be retained. We take out the original, just say when a front or secondary door exists, it should be retained. And then I think the sentence that says avoid solid doors, half-glazed doors, colonial style doors, that's a design element. And that would be, again, moved over to the earlier section of vertical rhythms and having those doors in place. It might be, I haven't figured it out unless maybe you guys can figure windows and hoods, or window hoods and entrances and porches. I'm not sure if those need to stay, if there's elements of those that stay as separate paragraphs, or if they can also be incorporated. Because I ran out of time, because the meeting was starting. But I'll look at that as well. But I think that's going to really clean this up, because we won't have we'll have less sections, and I think we won't be redundant by repeating something that was already covered in another section from a design perspective, but then repeating it more from a preservation perspective, which would be problematic.
Anybody have any questions on that? I mean, there was a lot there, and obviously, you know, Todd knows this stuff, and he spent a lot of time on it, which we appreciate the time you spent on it, and taking the time out of your day to meet us last week to get us to this point. Are you guys okay with taking Todd's recommendations, kind of redrafting this thing and bringing it back at the next meeting, and hopefully getting close to a point where we can make a recommendation, because it'll go from here to the council?
Well, we have to have a public hearing first here.
Okay,
We have to, so I see a couple of options. One is you want to see it again before you schedule a public hearing. Another is, nope, you're happy to see it for the first time at the public hearing. And so that's that's the question. Do you want to see Todd's work again? And then, okay, now we can set the hearing, which would mean that we're 2 meetings away from a public hearing. Or you could say, I have complete and total confidence in Todd, and I'm ready to have a public hearing at our next meeting when I see it for the first time.
or we could schedule the public hearing shortly after the next meeting.
Or you could schedule a.
But then you're having an extra meeting.
Yep.
Well, you know, it's up to you guys. It's been kind of a long road, and we want to get to the end of it here at some point. So I think it would probably be best if we all took one last look at it when the changes are made, just to make sure there's, all the shoulds got changed to shalls, and, you know, the more sets of eyes on it, I think the better.
Make sure I didn't stick in something I just wanted to have in there, and I'm just
Couldn't
kidding.
imagine you doing that. Did you have some, Todd?
Yeah, I do. I'm trying to figure out 6B3. That just a confusing kind of sentence to me. Maybe you can help me understand it.
Under demolition,
Yes.
B3. Well, that's where we have a provision that says that a denial of a permit will result in a taking of the owner's property without just compensation? Is that the one you're asking
Yeah,
about?
that's
Okay.
it.
All right. So that's the third basis for requesting approval of a demolition. And basically what it's saying is that if you are able to show that if you're not allowed to demolish your building, you would have a claim against the city for a taking of your property under the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, then the city has to approve the permit. Now, to make that kind of a showing under the law, you'd have to be able to show that without being able to demolish the building, you would have no reasonable use of your property. You couldn't use your, and we've talked about the challenges with, you know, what that means. You know, I've talked about no economically viable use of property, for example, and people have asked, what does that mean? Well, that's one of the ways the courts talk about what it means to take someone's property through regulation. It's called a regulatory taking. So if somebody could come in and say, I have no economically viable use of my property under the legal standard that the courts apply to a regulatory takings analysis, if they could show you that, then here they should be able to get approval to demolish the building. I hope we never see one of those. It'd be a mess.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or clarifications, or what do you guys think? Do you think we should bring it back here and then schedule the public hearing? Or do you think we should try to approve it during the process of the public hearing, or have the public hearing first and then approve?
Typically, the way you'd do it is you'd have a public hearing, get input, and then you'd decide either you're ready to vote at that point, make a recommendation to council, or you might say, as a result of input at the public hearing, you got more work to do. So you won't know till you hear the testimony at the public hearing. I will say, based on what I've seen in terms of the amount of effort that's already gone on into this, my guess is that you'll get to the end of the public hearing and you'll either be ready to make a recommendation or you'll maybe have a little work to do. I don't think you're gonna say like, well, we gotta start over. I think you're pretty close.
You gonna be able to try to incorporate Peggy's comments, I assume? That
Yeah,
was kind of
I
understood,
wrote them
but-
all down.
Yeah.
But I guess if, there's a couple that I might get in touch with you on just wording to make sure we're on the same page. So I'll reach out to you.
And I would just say that without the kind of expertise that someone like Todd is able to bring to this process, we wouldn't be where we are. I mean, I don't know how to, I wouldn't be able to come up with the suggestions that you described tonight for how to improve this. I mean, I just don't have the technical expertise. So,
Well, there's a quiz at the end of this thing.
I will fail. Talking about voids and vertical rhythms, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So,
Well, we got to make it clear enough that the commission can actually act on it, so hopefully it's at least moving in that direction.
So do you want to set up the public hearing for next month? Or do you want to review the changes next month and set up the public hearing after that?
Yeah, set it for next month, I think.
Okay. You guys all good with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
No pressure.
What we have, I will, in your defense, I think we'd still have to make sure that we had it available soon enough for public, that's.
yeah, we
that's a
should have the
conundrum.
draft, when we publish that notice, which has to be a Class 2 notice, we should have your draft by then. So that means 2 weeks before the meeting, or 3?
2 weeks prior to the published twice, or a week before the meeting.
The last one is 1 week
10
before.
10 days
10 days
prior.
prior to.
For me, I'll try to hit this right away while it's fresh in my mind.
So let's see.
But it wouldn't bother me at all to have another meeting with staff to go through
For your
it.
changes.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to be a part of that,
It's up
or.
to you guys, it's just, we gotta make sure we have your draft ready
Yeah.
before we publish notice.
Yes, before I think it goes in a
Which would
packet, I'd like to
Mean
sit
we'd
down
have
with
to
staff.
have it by it would hit the paper next Thursday.
Okay,
So not this
Because
Thursday,
it'd be
but
published the 20th and the 27th, and 10 days prior to the 8th is our normal meeting date, so.
all right. Well, I'll try to get my changes done in the next couple days. I'll send it to staff. And if you guys want to meet like we did last week and just kind of run through and make sure it looks like I caught the stuff we've talked about, then I'll be fine then with that going off as I want it at least to be looked through by someone else before it gets sent out.
You're taking a lot of, is it realistic? I mean, that's a big undertaking. Are you,
okay with that schedule?
Yeah, 'cause I've already got this all marked up, right here, so it won't take me long to do most of it. I think what will just slow me down a little bit is just the 3 paragraph, the windows, and then the window hoods and the entrances and porches. So I think the rest should go.
Maybe,
Oh, I should say, if I'm gonna be talking with you, I don't know if you're available next couple days if I give you a call. All right. Yeah,
then
I
you
should-
can send us your availability,
Okay.
and we'll try to get at least 2 out of the 3 of us there. Sound good? All right. Anything else on that? Otherwise, I think that was future agenda items. Do we have anything?
Public hearing.
Yeah, the public hearing, and then I think that's about it. Otherwise, we're looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.
I like these short meetings.
Short for you.
That's what I'm saying.
Doesn't sound like your other one was so short.
Oh, no, it went longer than expected, that's for sure.
Wordsmithing.